for today. So as usual, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians, the Wadi Wadi and Darawal peoples of this beautiful Illawarra region where NTI Institute resides. They carefully tended to the beautiful lands and waters for tens of thousands of years that we're so fortunate to enjoy now. And to pay my respects to elders past, present, and future here in Australia, but also on any land, those peoples who have lived in harmony with nature and each other on any land that you might be dialing in from. And so those of you that have been in a guest lecture with Associate Professor Milani, probably are already a fan and enjoyed his guest lecture on Sufism last year and our subject interreligious dialogue. But by way of introduction, haven't met him yet, we'll just remind everybody to stay muted, please. So Associate Professor Milad Milani is in the studies of religious studies at Western Sydney University, where he leads the Humanities Religious Studies Research Collective. So he serves editorial roles on a number of journals, including the Journal for the Academic Study of Religion and Sophia. Recently served as the president of the Australian Association for the Study of Religion. So Milad, your scholarship seems to really sit at the intersection of Islam, Sufism, and continental philosophy, but you have this rare depth in your work that really looks to the sort of connecting threads between mystical traditions and, correct me if I'm wrong, but also the figure of Jesus as he appears also in living Sufi and Islamic traditions. So you've also authored 6 books, I believe, by now. Is that right? 6 books. The most recent 2024 monograph.
I think so.
It's lost track. The most recent one was Heidegger, Ontology and the Destiny of Islam. And Associate Professor Milad also hosts a number of podcast series, which I think you can find on YouTube. I know I can, but I'm not sure if that's the best place to start, but certainly you can Google him on YouTube and find lots of very interesting discussions. And so we're very grateful to have you here with us, Milad. So we'll pass it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's lovely to see you all. Very good morning to you. I myself am speaking on Darug land, and I also pay my respects. It's wonderful to have this opportunity provided to me by my colleague, Dr. McDougall, and of course, the NTI Institute. And I always enjoy engaging with the Institute and speaking to students and colleagues. So thank you all for joining me today. My talk today, and I'll share just that slide so you guys can see the images. Really, these 2 images are, for me, quintessential. And I kind of like to keep them up here as a way of reflection as we go on with the talk. So the talk today is Jesus and the Buddha, Reorienting Lived Religion. But I have to start with a small confession. Originally, the working title for this talk was actually going to be Unsettling Religion. But I decided to be polite and choose something gentler. But now honesty compels me to say that this talk is still going to unsettle, but I promise only just a tad, only just a bit. And perhaps that is the most faithful way to begin any conversation, I believe, about Jesus and the Buddha, because both of them really unsettled the religious assumptions of their time, not aggressively, but quietly, courageously, and with extraordinary clarity, if I may add. So let me begin by framing the question that sits really at the heart of this talk, because everything that follows grows out of it. And essentially, if I go to the next slide, hopefully that's clear to everyone. Essentially, what if Jesus and Gautama Buddha are best understood not primarily as founders of religions, but as figures who reoriented what it means to live religiously. And what if their significance lies not first in the traditions built around them, but in the way they unsettled the expectations, assumptions, and inherited certainties of their own time? Now, I want to suggest that both of these figures operate as a kind of turning point, not because they inaugurate religious systems, but because they invite a different way of seeing and responding to the world. Their teachings, and just as importantly, their lives, I would add, embody a subtle but far-reaching reorientation. A reorientation that, in my view, sits away from inherited identity, away from the security of established authority, away from the demand for doctrinal certainty, and toward a transformed way of perceiving, acting, and relating. So this is what I mean by reorienting lived religion, essentially. And I want to be clear from the outset, so this is kind of my caveat. This is not a comparison of Christianity and Buddhism as traditions. I am not entering doctrinal debates, nor setting up parallels between metaphysical systems. In fact, one of my aims today is to hold those traditions respectfully at arm's length, precisely so that we can listen more directly to the disruptive clarity, and I emphasize this word again, disruptive clarity of Jesus and the Buddha themselves. So the approach is, I guess, technically speaking, methodological rather than theological. So that should be underlined. And my approach is rooted in in three things: the synoptic Jesus. So that's the three Gospels, the first three Gospels of the New Testament, the Buddha of the early discourses, and the biographical gestures that define how each lived the truth that they taught. So that's so. And I'd like to also, I'd like us to keep one central question in view as we move forward. That is, what would it mean to read Jesus and the Buddha as teachers whose primary work was to unsettle inherited religion so that a new orientation of living and perceiving might become possible? Now, this question, you'll appreciate, is quite significant. It has great weight, but this question will guide the structure of the talk, which unfolds in three movements, as I've outlined here. First, a look at their teachings. So we'll see how their sayings act as instruments of reorientation rather than doctrinal construction. Second, an examination of their lives. That is, how each embodied a form of religious dispossession that later traditions often struggle to preserve. And finally, a return to the question of lived religion, what remains open, urgent, and at stake when we take their reorienting gestures seriously. So before turning to the texts themselves, I want to underline one final orientation that will shape everything that I say. I'm just going to pop back to the images for now. So this is not an exercise, what I'm presenting to you today is not an exercise in harmonization. I'm not claiming Jesus and the Buddha teach the same thing. Their metaphysical commitments certainly differ. Their contexts differ. The trajectories of their traditions diverge widely. But what they share, and what I want to bring definitely into focus, is a gesture. a movement, a way of being in the world that loosens the grip of inherited certainties and opens a path toward clarity, compassion, and a freedom from the structures that make religion heavy, closed, or possessive. So put differently, the release, what I'm talking about is the release of what weighs down religious life. Now, in this gesture, the gesture of reorientation, this is exactly what I want to trace. And to do that, we first go naturally to their words. So having set the frame, I want to now turn to the texts themselves, because the reorientation I'm describing is certainly not abstract. It is visible and I think unmistakable in the sayings attributed to both Jesus and the Buddha. So what strikes me in both cases is that the foundational move is not doctrinal articulation, and this is really important, but a shift in perception. So each figure begins by unsettling the way reality is normally seen. So let me start with Jesus, focusing only on the synoptic gospels, precisely to avoid later theological overlays and complications. When we look at Jesus's teachings in the synoptics, what we encounter is not a systematic theology, that much is clear, but a series of ethical shocks, if I can put it that way, statements designed to overturn the inherited grammar of religious life. So consider, if you like, first the opening of the Sermon on the Mount. And this is a famous, well-known sermon. And it goes, and I quote some of it here, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the meek, blessed are those who are persecuted." Matthew 5, 3-12. You can read the rest of that. No doubt most of you might know it. This is not merely, I argue, pastoral encouragement or comfort. It is rather a direct inversion of a religious world built on honor, purity, lineage, and status. So I want to pose the first question of this section. What kind of religion begins by blessing those who have no social or religious power? Jesus plays at the center. He does play at the center, but he places at the center those whom his world routinely positioned at the margins. And this is a crucial shift in what he does. This is already a reorientation, a destabilizing of religious hierarchy. Now, second example deepens this first one. And he says, we read in Matthew 5:44, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Now, I argue that this is not an instruction to be morally nice. It is not moral uplift. Really, it disrupts reciprocity, disrupts group identity, disrupts purity boundaries. It dismantles the self's instinct to secure itself against the other. It dismantles the self's instinct to secure itself against the other. Now, a third example pushes even further. Mark 8:35. "Whoever wishes to save his life will lose it." This is a striking move. Self-preservation is itself the obstacle, in other words. It says the self-secured is the self-lost. In other words, the religious self cannot be secured by grasping. It is found through rather letting go. And then, of course, the parables, especially those that subvert moral expectations, parables that we all know very well, such as the Good Samaritan, the prodigal son, the workers in the vineyard, and I won't read out these at length. We can come back to them in the question and answers if you like. Each one really dismantles the assumptions that religion is a reward system or a purity ladder or a moral scoreboard. So this is really important. And here I draw on a well-known scholar, Giza Vermes, a renowned biblical scholar and historical a historian of religion, who offers a helpful insight in his book, a famous book you may have even seen or read it, titled The Religion of Jesus the Jew. And he suggests that Jesus spoke with an authority grounded not in law, but in an intensified immediacy of divine demand. He argues that Jesus teaches with a charismatic immanence that bypasses legal authority and confronts the listener at the level of lived response. So this is precisely the point. Jesus reorients the moral world toward immediacy, toward confrontation with one's own disposition, one's own vision of the world. Another scholar, well known in the field, Thomas Sheehan, a prominent philosopher and religious studies expert, in his book, The First Coming, goes even further in arguing that Jesus did not offer a new doctrine, but that he enacted a new possibility, a way of being that breaks open inherited forms. So this captures perfectly what we are tracing here today. Reorientation is an event, not a creed. So what emerges from the synoptics is not a system to be believed, but a transformation to be undergone. The result is that Jesus leaves behind not a systematic theology, but an existential summons, a transformation to be undergone. Now, return to the Buddha. The Buddha's reorientation is equally striking and profound, though I would say expressed in a different conceptual register. The Buddha begins where almost no, at least to my mind, no earlier religious teacher had begun, and that is he begins with suffering. From the first of the Four Noble Truths we read, this is the noble truth of dukkha. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering. So let me pose the parallel question. What kind of religious transformation begins not with ultimate reality, but with suffering as the starting point for clarity? The second noble truth, that suffering arises from craving, from tanha, is again a reorientation. Suffering arises not from sin, but from misrelation. The problem is not metaphysical. It is perceptual. It is the misseeing of the self. The third of the noble truths, cessation, shifts the goal away from possession, achievement, or divine favor, and into the cessation of clinging. And then, of course, the eightfold path: right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. Notice, I didn't just say mindfulness, concentration, etc. Say right mindfulness, right concentration. This is a discipline of perception, in other words. It shapes how one sees, understands, acts, and responds. It trains one's intention. Here the parallel with Jesus becomes visible in a subtle way. Jesus begins with metanoia, a change of mind, but the Buddha begins with right view, the correction of perception. In his careful reading of Buddhism, Richard Gombrich, the British Indologist and Buddhist studies expert, argues that the Buddha's originality does not lie in metaphysical doctrine, but in reconfiguring religious life around the transformation of perception. And Peter Harvey, a British scholar of Buddhism, puts it similarly in that the Buddha reframed the spiritual quest as the cultivation of wisdom and the letting go of possessive identity. Just as with Jesus, this is about unbinding, about releasing the structures that generate suffering and limit vision. So, like Jesus, the Buddha redirects the seeker away from certainty and towards clarity. One more canonical moment is crucial for my argument here. The Buddha's refusal to answer metaphysical traps. And I won't pronounce this correctly, I'm sure. The avyakata, unanswered questions. When asked whether the world is eternal or whether the soul and body are the same, he responds in the, I'll have a go, Malukya Sutta, by essentially saying that the Tathagata does not answer such questions. Why? Because such questions do not contribute to release from suffering. They lock the mind back into speculation, identity, and metaphysical possession. Like Jesus, the Buddha redirects attention away from certainty and toward clarity. What emerges is not doctrinal closure, but a new way of seeing. This lays the ground for the next movement, which we turn to, and that is their lives, where this reorientation, I would argue, is embodied. And this is important. So at this point, we can see a shared gesture. Both figures unsettle inherited religious expectations, break open existing moral and metaphysical frameworks, and redirect attention toward a transformed way of seeing. But they do this in ways anchored in different context and conceptualities, of course. So I'm not saying that this in any ways is equivalence. It is rather resonance, a shared movement of reorientation, and that's where I'll keep it. The key is to hold both together at the level of gesture and not doctrine. And this leads naturally to our next movement, because their teachings would mean far less if they were not embodied in their lives, if they were just abstract. So their lives are the greatest commentary, in other words, on their teachings. Their lives are, in fact, the reorientation that is enacted. Okay. Now, having looked at the textual gestures through which Jesus and the Buddha reorient religious consciousness, I want to turn now to something equally important. The way their lives enact the very transformation they teach. Because for both of them, teaching is inseparable from way of life. Their lives are, in other words, commentary on their words, and often the more radical commentary. So let me begin with Jesus again. When we read the synoptics through a historical lens, Jesus emerges not as a settled religious authority, but as an itinerant prophet, what Thomas Sheehan calls the eschatological herald. Consider the starkness of Matthew 8:20. Quote, "Foxes have holes, the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Now, I would say that this is not symbolic. I would argue strongly that this is biographical. Jesus demonstrates a form of religious life that is fundamentally unsecured, or if you like, unmoored from stable identity, property, or institutional authority. So let us note the following 4 points. First, his itinerancy is a reorientation in itself. He lives without a home, without possessions, without institutional office. That much is clear when you read the synoptics. His authority is personal, relational, experiential, not inherited, not conferred, not bureaucratic. That much is also clear. Now, question. What does it mean that the central figure of Christian tradition lived with no claim to religious space, status, or protection? Second, his table fellowship is also a reorientation. Eating with tax collectors, sinners, outsiders, this is not inclusive rhetoric. It is an existential dismantling of purity boundaries. The table becomes the site of unmaking and remaking religious community. Third, his refusal of kingship is a reorientation. In the synoptic memory, Jesus repeatedly avoids the political messianism people try to project on him. He refuses the identity others want him to secure. He does not consolidate a movement. He does not organize a party. He does not establish a structure. In fact, he walks away from the very thing religious figures usually seek. Fourth, his arrest and death are the culmination of his reorientation. In Gethsemane, when violence erupts, Jesus says, quote, "Put your sword back in its place," Matthew 26:52. This is a decisive moment. He refuses to defend his mission through force, or even to preserve his own life when doing so would certainly have secured his teaching. So, question: what kind of religious figure allows his message to fall into apparent failure rather than stabilize it through power? The crucifixion historically is the collapse of his ministry. Historically. He dies as a failed prophet in Roman eyes. And yet, this is the theological gesture later tradition struggles to reabsorb. In other words, it's a radical letting go rather than a triumphant securing. And this is really important. Jesus' life is a lived argument against the very forms of authority that later came to define Christianity. Buddha's life follows a different trajectory. But the gesture is strikingly resonant. First, the great departure is, I would say, renunciation as existential break. In MN 26, Aryan Pariyasana Sutta, the Buddha recalls leaving his life of comfort. He describes the luxurious palace life and the quote-unquote sense of urgency that arose in him. What he leaves behind is not just privilege, but identity. His departure is a reorientation. He denies the self the comfort of inherited certainty. Second, I would say the middle way is a refusal of extremes. After aesthetic excesses indeed nearly kills him, the Buddha realizes neither indulgence nor self-punishment leads to clarity. This becomes the foundational reorientation of the Buddhist path, the transformation of perception, not the conquest of the body. I think that's a really, really important point. So it is releasement from both extremes. Third, and most importantly, the refusal to answer metaphysical questions in MN 63 reveals this shift. When Malunkyaputta demands answers about the eternity of the world, the nature of the soul, the fate of the Tathagata after death, the Buddha replies, and I paraphrase, "These matters, dear Malunkyaputta, have not been declared." And then he gives the parable of the poisoned arrow, a dying man refusing treatment until all theoretical questions are answered. So the point is unmistakable. 1, metaphysics is less urgent than freedom from suffering. 2, speculation is itself a form of clinging. 3, obsession with ontology is another form of bondage. So, question: what kind of teacher refuses to construct a metaphysical center and instead directs the seeker back to clarity and practice? Fourth, the final key is the Buddha's death. Calm, untheatrical, non-centered. In DN 16, Makarinibbana Sutta, his final instruction is, be a lamp unto yourselves. His instruction is not follow me, nor obey my successors, nor hold to my authority, but become your own source of clarity. This is reorientation distilled to its essence. The Buddha does not die securing a tradition. He dies decentralizing himself. Now, let us draw the lives together, okay? And I'm going to begin my wrapping up of the talk, and I know I'm probably ahead of time a little bit, but that leaves more time for discussion, I guess, which is probably needed. So let us draw the two lives together. And if we look at these two lives side by side, we see that Jesus refuses the identity others try to project onto him. The Buddha abandons the identity he inherited. Jesus rejects religious authority as power. The Buddha rejects religious authority as metaphysics. Jesus dies without securing his teaching. The Buddha dies instructing his followers to rely on themselves. Both embody a religious life defined by releasement, and releasement is an important word here. We can come back to that. So both embody a religious life defined by releasement, a loosening of the structures that ordinarily stabilize religious identity. And so the final question of this section, if both Jesus and the Buddha lived as figures of reorientation, what happens when their traditions later attempt to recenter what they deliberately uncentered? So this question prepares the ground for our concluding remarks, the final movement, where we'll gather the threads into a final reflection on lived religion today. So I ask, what remains open? What remains possible? As we draw these threads together, I want to return to the central question that has quietly guided us through this exploration. What does it mean to speak of a reorientation of lived religion? When we look at the sayings of Jesus and the Buddha, and then at the lives that embodied those sayings, a pattern becomes unmistakable. Both unsettled, inherited certainties. Both call their hearers beyond social identity and religious boundary. Both refuse temptation to secure authority in themselves. Both open a way to life grounded not in possession, but in clarity. Not in system, but in transformation. Not in doctrinal mastery, but in a kind of existential letting go. And here is the paradox. The very figures who loosened the grip of religion became in time the centers around which new structures of certainty formed. That is, I'm not trying to assert a criticism of the traditions that followed. It is in many ways an inevitability of human religious life. I understand this. Communities stabilize, they must. Meaning solidifies, it has to. Authority crystallizes. It's necessary. And what begins as a reorientation ultimately becomes over centuries recentered. Again, one might argue that this is an organic development out of necessity. out of need. So the task for us is not to judge that process, certainly not mine, but to ask rather questions. And it is still, so such as, is it still possible to hear the original gestures of the Buddha and Jesus? Is it still possible to encounter Jesus and the Buddha as the level of reorientation rather than recentering? And perhaps more provocatively, what happens to our understanding of religion when we take that gesture seriously? And this is an important question for me as a religious studies scholar. Because if Jesus and the Buddha both lived a form of religious life characterized by dispossession, by relinquishment of identity, status, authority, and even metaphysical certainty, then the question becomes, what might a contemporary form of lived religion look like that takes this reorientation forward rather than closing it down? So, not the religion we inherit, but the religion we live, perhaps. Not religion as structure, but religion as openness. Not religion as possession, but religion as clarity, as compassion, as a new or freer way of seeing. This, I think, is where the legacy of Jesus and the Buddha still speaks to us today. Not to the consolidation of identity, but to its loosening. Not to the accumulation of certainty, but to its release. Not to the defense of a tradition, but to the awakening of perception. And that is why the title of this talk matters, which is Reorienting Lived Religion. Because whatever else Jesus and the Buddha achieved, they both opened a space, quietly, provocatively, courageously, in which human beings could step out from behind inherited forms and discover a different way of being in the world, a way that remains, I believe, open to us still. Thank you.
Thank you, Milad. That's certainly a very refreshing invitation.
That's a pleasure.
Good questions. Yeah. Milad, are you happy to stop sharing your screen and then we can all see each other? So it's wonderful. We do have a nice open space and time now. We'd given up until 11:30, but I understand some of you might need to leave before that, so this gives us more time for discussion. So because we have 19 people, if you have a question or something to say, just please put up your hand. And Milad, perhaps you can invite the person with the hand up.
Joseph, please.
Wonderful talk, Milad. As someone who has come from a Christian tradition into the Buddhist tradition, it's nice to have someone kind of weave a thread that is, as you said, that keeps the metaphysics at arm's length and looks for something much more kind of harmonious and kind of interesting to both parties. A number of things have come up for me. First, as you spoke, I thought of Thich Nhat Hanh's quote that our own life has to be our message, which is just so fantastic. It really does reorient the point of religious life not being speculative, but being very, and Elizabeth will nod her head, very embodied, really in the here and now. I'm much more familiar with the Buddhist tradition. I know a quote from Lin Ji, the Chan master, who would say, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him.
Yes.
The idea being that we're pointing to the certainties is actually more of a hindrance than a joy in our religious life. Is there similar threads that weave through either the Christian tradition or other religious traditions that you know of, kind of really pointing out the non-usefulness of that of making a real edifice of the tradition?
Yeah. I should have said also at the beginning of this talk this is kind of like a sketch, really the tip of the iceberg of my next research project, which involves a third figure whom I did not discuss today, um, who is Zarathustra from the Zoroastrian tradition. And for me, the three, Zarathustra, the Buddha, and Jesus, complete an arc in this theme, in this way that I've been addressing reorientation of religion. All three of them strikingly similar gestures. All three of them say strikingly similar things. And again, going to the sources and leaving the traditions slightly respectfully at arm's length. So that would be the other tradition for me in my understanding of all the traditions that I've come across. I think these three really go together in a way that sort of surprised me. And yeah, I think they resist that edification of the figure in a very significant way. But in all three cases, they're kind of usually you have to do a bit of a digging to get to that, because tradition, the many layers of tradition, not hide. I don't want to speak negatively. It doesn't hide it. It doesn't disguise it. It doesn't. It's not malicious. It's just what it is. Sediments of time. People doing what people do. Cherishing, loving, and adoring, and respecting, and worshiping is part of what we do. Right? We love each other as friends. We love each other as brothers, sisters, children, and we unwittingly glorify each other in a way that really shouldn't be, but it's just a description. It's an expression of our affection, and I think we mustn't forget that. So the great affection that these traditions have over time for these figures is remarkable, and it really speaks. It's a testament to who they really are. So my aim is never to deconstruct or crumble down and destroy tradition. It's really to sort of maybe shed light on what it's actually doing, rather than sort of pedestalizing figures. So it's harder with Christianity, for example, to sort of get to that point, because you do have to. I mean, for me, like when I said to you last time, I was a student of Buddhism, both in terms of practice and also study when I was an undergraduate, and I loved it, and I love it still, and it's very. I cherish it. It's very dear to me, and it was a lot easier for me to get to the heart of it. It's a lot harder with Christianity because the tradition is incredibly developed. It's incredibly complex. It's incredibly rich. Theology is so complex and nuanced. So it has taken a long time for me to read through the sources and get to some of the core and figure out how I can structure the arguments I need to in the way that I need to. So thank you for asking your question, Joseph. Appreciate it. Julian.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, new phone. This might be a bit elementary of a question. Also, thank you for the talk, Milad. I really enjoyed it. Might be a bit elementary of a question, but do you think that there's a link, even tangentially, metaphysics aside, between Jesus's last commandment on the Mount, love one another as I've loved you, and the Buddha's final instruction? Because maybe you could interpret a sense of passing on of responsibility and what's the word? Like personal, not responsibility, but like I can't think of the word. When the onus is then on the believer, love one another in his example, but it is up to the believer then to be their own church, their own representation and enactment of the teachings of Jesus. I wonder. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what your question is.
Sorry, yeah.
I mean, and it doesn't sound elemental. It actually sounds more complicated. So
Right. Well, there we go. Okay. Well, I'm kicking goals in that regard then.
I like it. I like it.
I'll bring it up to you again this week. I might be able to articulate it better.
Sure.
Too easy. Thanks, mate.
Oh, did you want to elaborate on it? Or?
Oh, well, I mean, I don't want to subject everyone else to my working through of it.
No, I mean, try and put it in a way that that you can formulate a question.
Right, okay. So what was the last statement from the Buddha? I can't remember the exact verbiage of what his last... It was to be one's own center or something like that, I think, wasn't it?
Essentially, it's not to follow him.
Not to
Essentially,
follow
it's,
him.
yeah.
Right, okay. Well then, yeah, I can see where the problem arises in what I've said then. Okay. I must have misremembered. The way I'd heard it, it was like the responsibility, the onus was then on his followers to be
Yes.
their own
Yes.
mast to tie themselves to. Okay.
Yes, that's right.
I was wondering maybe if you could draw a parallel then
Yes.
between be your own center
Yes.
and love one another
Yes.
in the same modality and with the same purpose which Jesus had presented, but then without him there as a guide, because as far as he knew, he was dying on the mount. He was no longer going to be there to guide.
Mhm.
I don't
Yeah.
know. I just wondered if there was a parallel there between be your own
Absolutely.
center and to love one another in my tradition, but you have to be responsible for doing the loving. It is now your task. I don't know.
No, absolutely. The short answer, yes. Very obviously, yes. Very resoundingly, yes. A parallel there. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, mate.
Thank
That was
you.
all. Thank you. Cheers, mate.
Michael.
Hi, this might be a strange question, but is there even like a hypothetical that maybe Jesus was aware of the teachings of Buddha at all?
Wow. Thank you for the question. It's a great one. It's far beyond me to say, and obviously not something that I've researched personally, but something that certainly I have heard others ask, as you have. I don't know if it's possible. I don't know that it's not possible. It remains a question for me. So, but thank you for bringing that up again, because now it's re-sparked that curiosity. Elizabeth?
Yes. So it's really interesting just to kind of notice that in both of these figures that, you know, not having that place to lay your head, that homelessness was their biography, and they both seem to in many ways share this central message. And so like in Buddhism, what's always appealed to me is how much they center a method. And so in Buddhism, like, you know, a big part of that is the, you know, techniques of meditation in order to overcome that perceptual, you know, confusion. Would you say that in the synoptics, would you see, like, first of all, contemplative methods in Jesus' life, but also I'm wondering too, if we see like, you know, tending to the poor or service being more of the method that he seems to be demonstrating?
Yeah, definitely. I certainly read it that way, and I can't help but see contemplative, or see what he says and how he is portrayed as a contemplative life in itself, in a deep and meaningful way. So yes, I would say you could see that. I mean, Jesus' life is, as far as we know from the synoptics, remains grounded in Jewish practice. So, as the scholar I mentioned is the authority on this, historical, textual authority on this, Giza Vermes demonstrates in his book. I mean, he's got two. The second one I read out to you, The Religion of Jesus the Jew, but the first one of his books was called, the first part to this second book was called the Jesus the Jew. And his point was simply that this is someone that you have to understand historically grounded in Jewish culture and Jewish religion. And it's not something that he sort of, as you read the synoptics, you can sense that. He's not practicing anything else. He's not doing anything differently. He's still following the Jewish tradition. He's praying. The table fellowship, in fact, Sabbath. These are all part of his um, way of, I guess, his method, if you like, as you said, his method of trying to reorient his disciples or anyone who's with him and following him and traveling with him, listening to him, eating with him, sitting with him, sleeping with him. He uses that the foundations of that tradition, the cornerstones of that religion, to help them see what they need to see, to help them be liberated from the constrictions of what has held them back to that point. So in a way, yes, he is the liberating force, but his methodology is very much using the religion at his disposal, his own tradition, essentially.
It sounds like kind of community life, tending to community sounds like that was important.
I mean, religious life is communal life. It's rarely in isolation. Isolation is probably moments where, you go away, you do your thing, you come back to it. But in practice and lived embodiment, I think it's a communal exercise.
Fostering that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. Melissa?
Hey, so it's actually John speaking. I'm sorry.
Hey.
I'm listed separately, but we were trying to get you the right
Oh,
number.
good. Apologies.
So first of all, just a wonderful talk. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing this perspective. I'm curious about if you have any thoughts about some of the movements in both traditions that have moved back towards lived experience. So movements that have, in a sense, kind of decentered the person and moved us back towards lived experience of the religious life that each of these individuals put forward. So I think, like Quakerism is a really good example in Christianity. Zen is a really good example in Buddhism. And then Zen, I think, is really interesting as a part of the Mahayana tradition because not only does it focus on lived experience, but in a way, I feel like all of the additional kind of canon that was added, the Mahayana canon, introduces all of these other deities and bodhisattvas and Buddhas, and almost in a way decenters the character of the Buddha through introducing those deities, and then also in a way kind of re-centralizes that message about the lived experience of religion.
Yeah. You pointed out the two big ones. I mean, Zen for Buddhism, I think for me, I would have gone to that straight away. So thanks for pointing that out. In terms of the Christian tradition, I am very interested in Eastern Christianity, and thus mysticism is a big part. And I think for me, because of the other work that I do on Sufism, or often called Islamic mysticism, I don't like that phrase, but it really goes to the core, because when you get into mysticism in any tradition, you begin to see how that decentralization reoccurs, and in fact, it's kind of the whole point to unsettle you once you enter that domain of the mystical practice and method and things like that. So yeah, in the Christian tradition, Quakerism is great. I've experienced Quaker sittings. It's very incredible. It's very moving. But also, I think though Christianity has, I would argue, at its core, this kind of spirit-based push and move. I refrain from using the word Pentecostal, but it has that, and it's kind of almost like a fail-safe. So where you kind of feel like, all right, I'm settled now, I'm comfortable, and it's like, no, the spirit has other plans. So you're moved, you're shaken or quaked, you're shaken into activity or rethinking, reorienting yourself. And so, yeah, it's there, and it's very strong in the Eastern tradition, in the Desert Fathers, in the other great thinkers in that tradition, who really, when you read them, yeah, they're experiencing that living that immediacy of reorienting, that it's just happening in their words as they're writing it almost. So yeah, it's huge. Yeah, I love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michael again? Michael? Yes.
Hi.
Hey.
Is Martin Luther a disrupting figure, much like Jesus
Right.
in his Protestant Reformation?
I wish one of my students was here because he's an expert on Lutheranism, but I don't see his name. But okay, I'll have a go. Yeah, I mean, I would classify or categorize Luther as such. He's what we call a rupture. So I wouldn't say disrupting, I would say rupture. Um, Primarily because I guess this is what you're hinting at. Primarily because he destabilizes a very comfortable Catholic tradition, perhaps too comfortable. So that is a very significant moment in Christian history. Yeah. But I mean, I would make distinctions between Luther and then Lutheranism later and so on and so forth. So, because another character, another figure whom I really like, Soren Kierkegaard, who's a philosopher, he is really, if you like, a big critic of Lutheranism of his own time. And he sees it as becoming too comfortable, forgetting the essence of what Christianity is and so on. So his writings are beautiful too, like that. They're very decentering. Joseph,
These are such good questions and answers. Thank you. Kind of
pleasure.
a follow-up to really the theme of the talk is that you mentioned that Jesus was coming from the tradition of Jewish culture, and that the Buddha was really coming from the Brahmanical culture and really reinventing, reorienting what that means. What do you think that those traditions, Buddhism, Christianity, or just other religious traditions now in modernity are reorienting? What kind of base are we working from, and what are we moving towards?
What do I think these
Yeah,
these
yeah.
traditions?
So if we take our modern life and the expression of religious practice is about that kind of reorienting,
Yeah,
what does that look like for us today?
yeah, that's the question, right? So that's kind of what I'm hoping to put out there for all of us to think about. And I guess the what it would look like depends very much on our own inclinations, proclivities, our own sensibility for things. I mean, religion is very personal. I mean, I knew that from the get-go, and it remains a very strong point. I mean, it's personal, so therefore, it's not something that others can decide for you. And I remain very strongly on this as an ethical point. It's not something that anyone not only can decide for you, but no one should enforce upon you. So it's not. It's that I would never ever tolerate that. But what it looks like, I guess, in saying that is depends entirely on you, because it's a journey. It's something that you have to navigate, and your tradition, whether it be in your tradition, whether it be outside of your tradition, on the peripheries of your tradition, whether it be without a tradition, it's entirely possible. And modernity allows that possibility in a way that's safe, in a way that's respected. You know, we don't live under the tyranny of any religious tradition, say in our world, which is great. And so we have that opportunity to explore, to ask questions, to walk away, to come back, because it's all part of the journey. To go from one to another, even, which would be forbidden in some parts of the world, punishable in some parts of the world. But, we are blessed with the opportunity to be able to explore religion. And I think that's really, in my view, I mean, if you're asking my point of view, I mean, religion is something I am very passionate about. I love studying, but I love it. I mean, I love religion. And it's really something that really gets me excited and brings me to life. So I think it's you, and you've got to you've got to find your way, you got to navigate, and you've got to fight the battles inside yourself. You got to fight the good fight, and you got to, be honest and do all the things that they're saying, It's hard, right? You don't want to sort of keep be a taskmaster for yourself. I mean, it's easier if someone else is, but that's the challenge, right? That Jesus, in my view, and the Buddha are putting to us if we are reading back in time to them. But yeah, and many people. I think the other part of your question was what are people doing? I think that many people. I mean, since the dawn of modernity, people have been trying to reinvent this thing and do it. But then I think the traps of, say, 19th century attempts at reinventions, Enlightenment attempts at reinventions, 20th century attempts at reinventions, the traps there are where any sense, any movement, any sect, any stream, whatever you want to call them, the traps for them has always been the same. It's been they fall back into the same routine of claiming absolute authority, claiming absolute certainty, claiming that this is the true tradition, the authentic, voice, and that is a problem in itself. That's kind of like repeating the problems of the past rather than moving away. So, but the attempt has always been there. So my talk is a little bit different in that sense. I'm not advocating for any new movement or reinvention of tradition or anything like that. I'm just saying let's hear what these guys have said and see what that does for us. Apologies for the long answer and for keeping you waiting, Michelle.
No, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, I just want to reiterate too, thank you so much. That I could easily have done another hour or two or three of your talk going deeper. That would have been amazing, but thank you. I just wanted to share, so I was raised, I'm in New Zealand, which is largely Christian, if anything. I mean, religion is disappearing rapidly. And my parents were uh, my mother used to tell everyone that she was atheist and didn't believe in anything. And I struggled with that as a child because I was very curious. But actually, when I look back now, it allowed me to just search everywhere with an open curiosity. So I'm kind of appreciative now. I used to tag along to other friends, kids, families, friends, families. It would take me to church on Sunday and that sort of thing and try and hook in. But the short what I'm coming to is that experientially, I've kind of come to the same conclusions that you've shared, which is sounds weird, right? But I've felt like that for such a long time, and actually, I keep glancing to because I've got my Buddha table here, and just above it on the wall is Jesus, because I feel like, and often when I give homage to the Buddha in my mind, I go, and Jesus. And I think of like Ram Dass, people like him who say, when asked, are you Buddhist? And he says, well, I'm Chris Jew, Chris Bud, and I haven't got a, and Hind, and what have you, I haven't got a problem with it. Why have you? And I feel as though there's a place this, um, for this not hooking to something really in a clinging way and to doing the work within, which both Jesus and Buddha told us to do. The reason I've sort of keep coming back to Buddhism or and settling there is I feel it's less obviously man-made, if you know what I mean. Like there's some doctrines that you're not allowed to get divorced. I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'm not doing that. So and I feel like that's too far away from the original messages.
Yeah.
And I don't know actually how it's displayed, but could you speak a bit to, well, your views, I suppose, maybe personal, but also from your studies around, placing yourself in something specific? Isn't that really just going back to the man-made doctrine? I'm not too sure.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing your a bit about your personal background and your question. I definitely relate to that, and I'm glad that you've come to the same conclusions. My hope is that everybody, um, in their own way, does this, and no doubt has already done this. I don't claim originality to this, obviously. I think anyone who turns their mind to this question will eventually come to a similar conclusion, but I don't want to sound, and like I'm closing the loop on this. There are so many things that we can't always factor in. I'm guided by my gut, if you like, by my instincts. I always follow my intuitions. Similarly, I had a father who was not an atheist, but very skeptical and cynical of religion. So that always allowed me, I felt room to explore. I was like, hey, I can ask the questions, I'm not going to get in trouble. Um, and yeah, the opportunity to be able to, and my parents similarly gave me the freedom to explore, and they knew that I loved religion. I mean, I think that was very obvious as I came into my teens. Um, and in fact, I think the first book I read was on Buddhism. um, and similarly, I think Buddhism just offers this beautiful, even as a tradition, right? But even just by way of the words of the Buddha, it offers kind of a liberating feeling where you don't feel trapped by doctrine, theology, metaphysics, even practices. I mean, the practice is really just contemplation, meditation, or walking meditation, or, just sitting in silence and reflecting or not reflecting, really, and just letting it be. And so that's really important to me. The the academic side of things are interestingly too tied in with Buddhism because there's a figure who I didn't mention his name, whom I use as I was telling Elizabeth as a thinking partner, the philosopher Martin Heidegger. And Martin Heidegger is obviously controversial. He has all these things. And not many people like him. But the thing is, he was someone who was not shy of addressing the hard questions. He never shied away from difficult issues. He addressed the problem. And his whole thing was to go to the core and deal with the problem. And thinking was a big deal to him. So thinking is a big deal to me in terms of religion. And in that respect, I don't think you should feel any discomfort by using the phrase man-made religion. I mean, one of the opening lines from my history of religion class to my students is that religion is man-made. And that is not a slight, that is actually a historical fact. Religion is man-made because we experience something mystical, if you like, something beyond our understanding and comprehension, and then we formulate that into a concept, and then we produce material culture based upon that. So in that sense, that's what I mean, is man-made, and there's nothing wrong with that. That does not undermine the authority or power of God or your belief in that in any way. Because as we know, there are many different churches, there are many different religious traditions, branches, so on and so forth. So, and we don't want to have authoritarian battles. So it's a very acceptable phrase as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, I think I'm losing track now of your question, but I think I'm just kind of reiterating what you said and agreeing with you immensely, that it's profoundly important that we travel. Again, if I use that, and those intersections are very important. So for me, I guess my talk, the purpose of it, and my project, as I will go into it deeper, is to remind, I guess, ourselves of the fact that there are bridges, there are crossovers, and yes, we may want to say I am this or that or the other, and that's fine. But there are many of us who don't and can't, And even though we settle into something which feels comfortable and familiar, we may still think of something else. Like you said, you're homage to Buddha, but you always think of Jesus. Similarly, I have the same experience. I mean, my roots, Persian, Zoroastrian, that is in me. That can never leave me. So no matter what I'm doing, I'm always thinking about that. And that it's like a river that kind of keeps flowing through what I'm doing. You know, when I'm thinking about Jesus, when I'm thinking about the Buddha, you know, this flows through. And it does in a very organic way, I might add. There is rarely conflict. And
No.
yeah. All right.
Have you seen this?
What's that?
Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Jesus and the Buddha as Brothers.
Okay,
So beautiful.
I'm gonna look that up. Okay.
I'm not sure I'm getting the light right, but
No, that's fine.
that was really beautiful. Thank you. Because
Thank you.
sometimes I feel a little bit kind of a little cross between abnormal and a little bit guilty, you know.
Yeah.
The Buddhists might seem a Christian, or the Christians might seem. But on the other hand, I say to people, oh, well, if I have to tick a box, like on a form, I'll tick Buddhism. But really, it's more about the message and
Yeah.
the truth, the capital T truth underlying everything. So, thank you so
Thank you.
much.
And may I just say, don't I mean you've just put your finger on something really, really important and expressed something really precious. Do not feel bad about that in any way. It's okay to sit on the border in that sense. And I don't like that word border or fringes or anything like this, but you know, there are religion is not meant to be comfortable, if I can put it like that, in my very personal view. In a way, it's meant to challenge us always. So if you feel like you're comfortable, I think that you need to think about, why am I so comfortable?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jan, was it? Melissa? Jan?
Now it's me.
Yay. Okay.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
All right. I must start with thank you. This is a home. This is a dual belonging home. Johnny is ordained in Zen, and he's an army chaplain, a Buddhist army chaplain. And I have my vows in Buddhism within Fo Guangshan, and I'm also studying to become an Episcopal priest. So I hold both Buddhism and Christianity very close, but also not too tightly. And so I want to encourage Michelle. I have a space where I also have a Buddha and a cross. And I wanted to speak to the gifts of not holding these tightly and letting the way that we interact with the faith be alive. And so when I was a little girl, I had an evangelical minister grandfather who was perpetually upset at me for not being his religion. And he finally he said, just, I'll leave you alone if you just tell me once and for all what faith you are. And I said, look at how I live my life. That's my religion. And I actually meant it really reverently. And so as I became an adult person and able to really be able to construct what my religious practices were going to be, I think you spoke to it tonight, which is our faith needs to be alive. And religion is not supposed to be the destination. It's not supposed to be our geography. It's supposed to help aid us in being contemplative, in being unsettled, in continuing. And I think the beautiful part is when we're doing these teachings, they require no label. You know, if I'm feeding someone who's hungry, I don't need to say, well, this is my Christian thing I'm doing. So I just think I wanted to be able to say thank you and giving us a place to be able to have these things come together and honor the unsettling. Thank you for that.
Thank you. And it's an honor to have your presence. Thank you. And your words mean a lot to me. So I appreciate that. Yes. Helen?
Yeah, thanks. I know I should know where the raise your hand symbol is, but I
That's
can't
okay.
find it. Never mind. Something that's really interesting. I know that the talk was reoriented, you know,
Yes,
live,
I.
live religion. But this is us looking back. We did get Christianity, we did get Buddhism. At the time we've got Jesus and the Buddha, we didn't have those religions. We didn't have that infrastructure.
Yeah.
So to me, like everybody's been saying, we don't need to have labels. We can just go back to Jesus and the Buddha, and it's a philosophy, it's a way of life, which later was incorporated in these institutions, which became religions. So, yeah, I don't quite know what question I'm asking you, but I just wanted to note that it is a religion today, but it wasn't when these guys were actually teaching their philosophy, their way of life, and they're upsetting the establishment.
Mhm. I love what you say, and it's absolutely right. And upsetting is a nice word. It's a nice English word, which actually I first encountered in Peter Rabbit when I was reading it to my children, and it was used in a way that I wasn't familiar with, because I was born in Iran, obviously. English is my second language, and it's something that I had to learn as a 9-year-old. But the thing is, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I think that's a historical reality that always blows my mind. Is when we think about Christianity, when we think about Buddhism, these were not religions at the time of Jesus and the Buddha, but they emerge obviously they emerge organically. They emerge for reasons that are necessary in a way. And so they function as the purpose that requires them in terms of giving a new name, a new home, a new structure, a new foundation to the group or movement that has now embraced the teachings of these two great figures. So that's how I see it. But obviously, the struggle is not to forget um, not to forget the message for the tradition, and always keep that in view. And that's a struggle. That really is. For anyone practicing, it's hard. Traditions I mean, they're masterfully done, right? They've been crafted and perfected over centuries. So traditions just have a way of drawing you in, and you just go with the flow, and it feels almost natural and fine. And I have no criticism of that. And I think, though, apart from the fact that it requires us to always remember the original message, and yeah, and that's where perhaps a little bit of tension emerges in that awareness as it arises in us. And so I think we should always be mindful and gently invite ourselves to reflect and think about what's happening and where we're at and what we're doing. Yeah. Thank you.
You know,
Mm. I'm just checking if I've missed anything in the chat.
I do have a look. There's
Okay. Yeah, all good, I think. So, how are we feeling, everyone?
this is just it's been just a treasure because this reflection that you've invited, I feel that what's emerged here is that that ability to kind of abide with uncertainty and be unsettled and to sort of abide with tension is in a way sort of the heart of it. And we live in such times of fear and collapse and great uncertainty. I think as humans we just want to grasp that certainty, and that's I think such a problem. So I really appreciate us all really recognizing that.
Yeah.
to do otherwise.
That's very true, Elizabeth. I think it's human instinct to want comfort. And often that comfort comes from the very obvious thing, which is certainty. You just want to know that you're safe, you're okay, what you have is good. And that's perfectly normal. I mean, that's understandable, right? I don't hold that against anyone. And I think I've said this already, but I respect every religious tradition and every representative of that tradition. But my own mission as an academic, which is also my personal mission, is the understanding of truth. And it's always been my thing ever since I can remember. And in a way, paradoxically, I think certainty creates tensions with truth. And I know that sounds almost crazy. It's like, because truth is so certain, but I don't think so. That's not how I see truth. And I see truth as almost as the uncomfortability of living with the uncertainty, with the uncertainties perhaps that surround us, that come into our minds. So it's hard. It's really hard. Yeah. Are we still recording?
We're still recording.
Okay.
Yes. We can edit this part if people.
Oh, no. It's fine. It's fine. I haven't said anything. I regret. In fact, I don't. I'm very comfortable sharing what I'm sharing. So, yeah. I've really. I feel like you said, I feel like I could almost go into a meditation. Almost feels that way. So I appreciate it. I've really enjoyed your presence. I've really enjoyed engaging with you all. I'm grateful for the opportunity, Elizabeth. I think this is a treasure, what you've given me, given this opportunity to me. And I wish we were in person all together, but I can, it almost feels like I can feel you. So thank you. Thank you so much.
We look forward to your next visit, Milad.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much. And to everybody for being. So this will be recorded and it will go up on the NTI Conversations page. It usually takes a week or two to process, but if you want to share the recording with people after, you can definitely do that.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Milad, and peace to you, your family, and to everyone.
Thank you so much, and likewise. Thank you. Love to all. Appreciate you all being here. It's wonderful to meet you, and hopefully we have a chance to meet in person at some point.
I might just stop the recording here.